We'll wait for a few people to get in here, and we'll get started from there.
Sure. So we just answering questions or chatting with people. I'm down for whatever. It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, for sure. What's up, guys? There's a couple in here. Welcome, guys, to we're doing a thing a little bit different. Welcome to a later night live stream. Normally, try to do them around 6-ish, 5 to 6-ish. Well, today we're doing it a little bit later, a little past 8 o'clock here in Indiana, Eastern Standard Time. Joining me, Andrew Thomason. Andrew, thanks for tuning in, my friend, and thanks for hopping on. How are you doing?
You got it, Cody. No problem. I'm doing well. Things are going really well for me, and I really can't complain, honestly.
Good. That's awesome, dude. Yeah, it's certainly exciting because Colts football is officially 30 days away from kickoff when they're down there in Jacksonville. So that's going to be super exciting to kind of see, this new team. It's a revamped team. How's this team going to work together? And, are they going to be a middle of the pack team or are they going to be a good team? We think they have the potential to be a very good team, but it'd be interesting to see what's going to happen here. So, Andrew, there's been a couple things, and I guess before we get into those, because I want to find them, there's a couple different guys, different Colts players that had recently met with the media, which I thought was interesting. And there's some other Colts news. T.Y. Hilton, who had been struggling with that hamstring injury, he returned to practice a few days ago, which is certainly a good sign for Hilton being able, to be back out on the field, because we know the last couple of years have not been kind to him. And I know the Colts social media was really hyping him up, being back with the Colts out on the practice field. Andrew, obviously physically that's a good sign for T.Y. Hilton, but how about mentally? How good do you think that feels for T.Y. Hilton after he's been struggled with the injury bug the last couple of years? I mean, he's missed, I think, 25% of the games, they said, so 8 out of the 36 games, if my math is correct. That's crazy. So I'm curious your thoughts on how important that is to get Hilton out here. It's even, it's 30 days away from the season, but how important is it in your opinion?
I think it's vital, Cody. I think when you look at T.Y. Hilton and the explosiveness that he brings to this Colts offense, not having him out there, I mean, you just look at last season. Colts ranked 30th in passing yards per game, which is just awful. That's just, it is what it is. And, to have Hilton out there is it's monumental. It's huge. It's vital. And for him especially to have that boulder off of his shoulder, if you will, as you said, that sort of kept him down the last couple of years. Because Hilton was a guy that I think a lot of people forget wasn't really susceptible, or I shouldn't say susceptible, but wasn't really injury prone. No. He didn't have a lot of injury history prior to these past 2 years. And then as of late, as you said, he sort of struggled to stay healthy. And so I think for him, both mentally and physically, it's a major step in the right direction, especially when you have a guy like Phillip Rivers coming in, a guy that you have to, or that you should want to go out there and get reps with and make sure you're familiar with, because, he obviously went from Locke to Brissett and then now to Rivers. I mean, they're obviously 3 very different quarterbacks. And I think Hilton's excited to be out there, and I think he's going to, now that he's fully healthy, bring a great dynamic presence to this Colts offense.
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw Jim Irsay's tweet basically saying, like, really, he mentioned Paris Campbell by name, which I thought was really interesting, saying that he caught a really deep bomb from T.Y. Hilton. So the Colts are obviously very high on Paris Campbell. And I've heard Zach Pascal's been making plays. Man, this just has to be exciting to see this Colts wide receiver core with all this potential and all this youth. How excited, Andrew, are you, man, for just this team and specifically this receiver core, a position that's really been struggling with production, yes, but also just the injury bug? How encouraging is it to see those guys out there, or at least, I guess, hearing those guys out there making plays so far?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you, as a Colts fan, as a journalist, I can't help but be extremely excited. If they go out there and make plays each and every week, that'll certainly give me something to write about. They'll help me make my job much easier. But right. From a fan perspective, it's certainly it's really, really exciting. And, like I said, you mentioned guys like T.Y. Hilton, Paris Campbell, guys that were really injured last season, or for the majority of last season, and weren't just able to stay healthy. And I think now that they're both recovered from the injuries that they had sustained, I think that, it was one thing to have to worry about T.Y. Hilton and the kind of speed that he brings and the kind of dynamic route running ability that he brings too. I don't think that gets talked about enough, to be honest with you, Cody. And then now you have to worry about a guy like Paris Campbell, who, yes, is primarily probably going to play most of his time in the slot, but he is dynamic anywhere he goes on the field. He can take a bubble screen or just a simple screenplay 80 yards to the house. And even when he's lined up outside, he's got that 4.3 speed that you have to really prepare for. And if you've got a guy like Hilton and Campbell who have similar traits in terms of speed out on the field, it can be certainly dangerous for opposing defensive backs if you don't prepare properly.
Yeah, for sure. It is just super exciting and super encouraging to see potentially the wide receiver core that's notoriously this past decade, outside of Reggie Wayne, obviously, and T.Y. Hilton. It's been a major weakness on this team for a long time, especially that number 2 wide receiver position. But it's just so encouraging as a Colts fan to see the Colts not just have one guy you think potentially could be number 2, but really 3 other guys that we think could legitimately have a shot. And I would say between those 3, probably the 2, Pittman and Pascal, would be my bets for the number 2. So talk to me about Pascal. I'm curious about Pascal because we love Pascal. Derek and I are really, big fans of his. Obviously, we had him on the podcast. We interviewed him. So if you guys haven't checked that out, that's a really fun interview with Zach Pascal. We also interviewed Reese Fountain, another Colts wide receiver. But talk to me about Zach Pascal, and we'll just throw Michael Pittman in there as well. How do you think they help complement, and potentially can, if they stay healthy, help complement T.Y. Hilton and give him kind of a partner in crime, if you will, or partners in crime in that wide receiver group? Because he just has not had that. I mean, you think about all the receivers that were supposed to be it, right? I mean, Donnie Avery, out of all those guys, I'd say Donnie Avery was the most productive. And he wasn't even signed with really the intention to do that, which is crazy to think about. I mean, you got Dante Moncrief, who Derek and I talked about in the video we posted this morning. We broke down the 5 burning questions for the Colts. He was supposed to be something big. He showed flashes, but really it was boom or bust with him. Hakeem Nicks, another name, if you remember him. He had a 1-year stint with the Colts. I thought he was going to do big things and really didn't pan out. Obviously, Andre Johnson, you go swing for the fences, you completely miss with Andre Johnson. He's at that point past his prime, and he's not very productive. And it seems like there's just guys after guys. Oh, also, Phillip Dorsett. I couldn't remember his name. He did not make an impact with the Colts much, but Phillip Dorsett got traded for Jacoby Brissett, obviously. So there's a lot of those names are very similar. So sometimes I'm like, oh, what was his name? And I just got to remember. But
sure.
Going back to my original question, how do you think these guys can complement Hilton well here, and be kind of his partners in crime this season?
Well, I've sort of mentioned it during the other times that we've discussed on the podcast, especially with Michael Pittman coming in. As I mentioned before, Phillip Rivers had a lot of success in Los Angeles with those bigger-bodied wideouts. You look at a guy like Keenan Allen, who I believe is like 6'2", if I'm not mistaken. I could be maybe a bit off there. Mike Williams, I know for sure, is 6'4".
He's like 6'4", yeah.
And having somebody that can go up and catch those 50-50 contested balls if needed is huge. I mean, especially for a guy like Phillip Rivers. And then you mentioned Hilton in the receiving core. If Pittman can come in right away, and Pascal as well, not necessarily coming right away because he's already been there, but if he can continue to improve from where he was last year, what was it, 607 yards or 706 yards?
It was about 700. So it was close,
And he stepped up in a big way last season, and if he can continue to improve upon that, and then you bring in a guy like you said, such as Michael Pittman Jr., that brings that physical element that the Colts, as you said, Cody, have been missing for many seasons. Yeah. Donnie Avery, Andre Johnson, Phillip Dorsett, and a lot of those things, the one thing that a lot of those guys had in common, maybe other than Andre Johnson, were they were just burners. And that's not a shot at Dorsett or Avery, but they weren't as technically sound or developed as a guy like Michael Pittman Jr. is on film, at least, when he played for USC. And so I think that's certainly what the Colts expect him to bring, is some of that more technical soundness that he showed at USC, the ability to create separation because of his size, and the ability to catch a lot of footballs. If you remember at USC, I don't remember the exact percentage, but he didn't drop a lot of passes. And I think the Colts are really going to look his way, not only, at the beginning of the season, but I think throughout the entire season, if he can prove and play like he did at USC.
It certainly is going to be awesome. And Derek kind of mentioned it yesterday, I guess last night when we were recording, today when we posted it. Just having a guy like Michael Pittman where you can just throw it to him, he just has an outplay. You just got to get a first down, right? It's third and, medium to long distance. You just can trust a guy like Michael Pittman he may not always make the big flashy play like T.Y. Hilton does because he doesn't have that kind of speed, but he's just consistent. He's got great hands. Like Derek even said, and I think it's really high praise, but he said he's just a bigger Reggie Wayne. And I think they play a little bit different, obviously, because Pittman was 6'4", Reggie Wayne was, I don't even know if he was 6 foot. So obviously their playing style is going to be a little bit different, but they both have great hands. And I think that's what he was referring to there with those two guys. I mean, Pittman he dropped like 4 or 5 passes like his entire career at USC. So you can trust him, even if he's still developing, if he needs some time to develop, those hands aren't going to just go away at the NFL level. I mean, that's a valuable piece to this offense, and just an efficient way you can keep drives alive. And honestly, that could be the difference between scoring 3 points and scoring 7 points, or even scoring any points at all. So I think he's going to be a very valuable piece for what the Colts want to do, whether or not he's fully ready to play here in week 1, year 1 for the Colts. Let's get into a few of these comments here before we get going. FaZe Waterhose, he says, yes, sir. Welcome back, FaZe. Good to have you in the chat, my friend. Justin says, let's talk some Colts football, baby. Yes, sir. That's what we're doing. That's what we're about. We're just kind of sitting around and Friday night, and Andrew and I are gonna do a fantasy league here in a couple hours drafting. So we're like, hey, we have a downtime, a couple hours here. Let's talk some Colts football. I'm sure there's some people out there that are kind of bored here with not really being able to do a whole lot with everything going on, and let's do it. So appreciate you, Justin. Welcome back to it. Miles, welcome, Miles. Glad to have you in the chat, my friend. Eagles season is 30 days from now. Yes, sir. The Colts yesterday, I remember looking, it was exactly a month until they kicked off, 31 days. So today makes it 30. Jennifer is in the chat. She says, hey, y'all. Jennifer, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. To Kale, I'm sorry if I botched that first name. Welcome to the channel, man. We appreciate your love for this channel. Miles talking about that wide receiver group. He says it's going to be crazy. I think the biggest question mark for me, Andrew, is can these guys stay healthy? Because if they can stay even relatively healthy, they're going to be so much more improved this season compared to last season. Last season, that you were bringing guys in from the street at one point. It was that bad.
Yeah, no, for sure. My apologies there. Didn't mean to cut you off.
You're good.
No, but you made a valid point. I mean, and Chris Ballard mentioned it at the end of the season. He said, I didn't do enough to help give this Colts offense some more weapons out on the perimeter. And so that's why he went wide receiver heavy in the draft, or went offense heavy in the draft. He brought in Michael Pittman Jr., Jonathan Taylor, and even Desmond Batten, who could maybe come in and surprise a lot of people too. And I think that, like you said, even if these receivers and this receiving group can stay relatively healthy, there are 16 games in a season. Let's say each receiver gives you an average of 12 to 13 games or 14 games. They don't play the entire season. Maybe they're injured for a game or two, or maybe Colts are in a good position where they sit most of their starters at the end of the year. Even then, even from both of those scenarios, this receiving core finally has enough depth to be able to perform on a weekly basis and to really do some damage to opposing defenses if they can, get to training camp and get that rapport going. And I think it'll definitely be interesting to watch. Just to bring up something you brought up earlier, Cody, with Jim Irsay's tweet. I don't know if you had also saw that he had mentioned Jonathan Taylor had a 70-something yard run. And I thought, my first thought was like, man, I would love to see that video. If there was a film crew out there or somebody that has it on video, just Jonathan Taylor running behind that beast of an offensive line, and just I'd love to see it. And so, the receiving core definitely in much better shape than last year.
Oh, for sure. That's something that you mentioned. Just the depth alone is absolutely wild. Like, you think Marcus Johnson was out there last year. He's presumably going to be number 5, number 6. I think he'll be number 5. I mean, he was starting games for you last year. So if that tells you anything right there, you got depth. You really do. And even if you keep 6 wide receivers, I mean, we probably keep Ashton Doolin, I'm thinking, just because of special teams. But, I mean, you got an insane amount of depth. And I think if they can all stay healthy, I mean, this unit, the sky's the limit. I think this unit and then also the defensive line with the addition of Buckner, Day, and some others, I think these 2 positions have the most potential to make a major turnaround. I really do. I really do. And Lawrence agrees. He says health is so important for this passing game. You know, having a chance is the biggest turnaround in this position group. And I agree. I really do. I really do. Miles talking about Zach Pascal. He says Zach is my favorite Colt. He's definitely up there for me too. It's crazy just his story. I mean, I believe he was on Tennessee's practice squad or something like that. Or maybe he was on their roster for the preseason. He didn't make the final 53-man roster. The Colts claim him, and now he was a leading receiver last year. Like, it's just been a really cool story. Could potentially be the number 2 receiver to start the year. I mean, I just love the story of Zach Pascal. I always love those stories of undrafted guys just coming in and making a big impact. I mean, that's what the Colts were built on when they went to the Super Bowl. I mean, back in the glory days, you think of some of those undrafted free agents they had. I mean, you think Jeff Saturday's a big name. You even think Gary Brackett's another big name that was undrafted. And then you even got some later round steals. Antoine Bethea, a later round steal there. So there was a lot of good pieces that you could find in undrafted free agency. And the Colts certainly have with a couple guys. Obviously, Pascal. Jack Doyle's another one who was, funny enough, with the Tennessee Titans also before he came over to Indianapolis. Kenny Moore, another one. There are some pieces here of undrafted free agents who have made a good impact and are making a good impact, and they're still young, which I think is really, really important. So here's an interesting question from JH. JH asks, you think the NFL has a full 16-game season? Andrew, what are your thoughts on this?
In my mind, yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, you look at the way the NFL is handling the process in terms of, what's going on with COVID. I think they've got sanitizing stations set up in every facility. They've got team doctors there. They have daily testing. I think the important thing to remember is the NFL is a multi-billion-dollar franchise. So if there's any sport that has the funding and the capability financially to be able to support something like COVID, it's the National Football League. And so I think that's something that has to be taken into consideration. I think last I checked on Twitter, they had tested, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was less than 5%, or it might be even 0.5%. I'm not sure, but it was a really low number compared to the thousands of players and coaches and staff members that they had tested. And so it just kind of goes to show that what they're doing is working. And so now, will it work for 16 weeks straight? Obviously, once you get out there and you get some more contact with other players and you start grabbing all over them because that's part of the game, who knows? We'll see. I certainly hope so, but I think right now, looking forward, you can't help but give them credit for what they've done, how they've approached this, and I think that the NFL will be in good shape this season.
By the way, kind of speaking of that, did you see the news about that Seahawks rookie who got released because he tried to sneak a player disguised as a Seattle football player into the team hotel? Did you see that? That's absolutely crazy to me that somebody would try that.
Yeah, I did. Honestly, me, Cody, I'm an NFL nerd. I mean, I follow every bit of the NFL teams, roster stats, it. And so it's like, I saw that and I had to read that 2 or 3 times. I couldn't believe what I was reading. And I thought, you just get drafted. You have it regardless of what round you're in, because we've seen some of the NFL's greatest players be drafted in the later rounds. So, you don't necessarily have to be a first, second, or third round pick to be an NFL great. But with that being said, you get drafted and you have a chance, regardless of how big or small, to put your family in a situation financially, put yourself in a situation financially, to be set for the rest of your life. And not only that, set aside the financial aspect of it and think about the personal aspect of it. These players, these guys, these college athletes that train to be in the NFL because they love the game of football. And why you would damage that, or not damage that necessarily, but why you would put that at risk. I couldn't think of the words. why you would put that at risk? And as you said, bring in somebody that's disguised as a Seahawks football player, and it resulted in you getting cut. So I mean, and the other thing, kind of piggyback off of that, I don't know if you saw that the Patriots rookie center that they just drafted. I think it was a later round center. He just retired. I mean, they just drafted him, and he retired.
Seriously?
Oh yeah.
What round?
And
when did they draft him?
like 5th or 6th, I think. Okay. Later round.
It's still notable.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, to be drafted, there are hundreds and hundreds of players that go undrafted. Certainly, it's notable. But yeah, no, they drafted him that late, and I guess from the reports that I had read, it wasn't COVID related. It wasn't family related in terms of COVID anyway. So I don't really know the reasoning behind it. I was kind of shocked. Mm-hmm. I've been paying attention to the NFL, covering the NFL for a while, and I've never seen a rookie that gets drafted, regardless of the round, just call it quits. Everybody has their reasons, and I think at the end of the day, it has to be respected because we're all our own individual people at the end of the day, and we have our own families and whatnot to tend to. But who knows? But I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Did you see Mike Vrabel's comments on it? I thought they were pretty hilarious.
No, I didn't actually.
He said, my first response to that is, I hope that she wasn't the size of an actual NFL football player. I thought that was hilarious. It's like, oh gosh, like you can even imagine like what that person would look like if they were the size of an NFL player. That's terrifying. But I thought that was hilarious. Tequil's back in here. He says, I'm excited about the running back group, Colts. Yeah, let's talk about the running back group. Because that was one of my burning questions. Actually, my sixth burning question, how does this running back group pan out in terms of the snaps? How are the snaps going to go? I mean, Frank Reich has been adamant, and he said recently, Marlon Mack is our starter right now. But I'm curious your thoughts, Andrew, on how you think, will that change as the season goes along? Like, will Mack get the majority of the carries to start the season? And then if Taylor continues to, get better, will he, kind of even it out, and maybe Taylor even gets more of the snaps? I know Reich also added about, we won't be afraid to run with the hot hand, like roll with the hot hand, which I think is notable as well. Give me your thoughts on this running back group, specifically those top two guys and how that'll play out.
Well, it's certainly notable. I mean, I was actually going to bring up that exact same thing, with what you said earlier, or what you said with Frank Reich mentioning that Marlon Mack is the starter. And I think he deserves to be. I mean, look, this guy was a 4th-round pick. I forget this school. Forgive me.
South Florida. You're good.
Yeah, South Florida. Yeah, I could picture the logo in my head. I just couldn't remember.
Yeah, the Bulls.
Yeah. But no, with Marlon Mack, I mean, you look at the production he's had in the last 2 years. Granted, he's running behind arguably the best offensive line in football. Even still, you look at the production. Cody, if you remember, go back to 2017 when he was drafted. Mm-hmm. When the Colts offensive line was just, for lack of better words, not great. It's awful.
That's putting it kindly.
That's putting it very kindly. But no, Marlon Mack, it's funny. I had season tickets that year. It was a really bad year to have season tickets, but I had season tickets.
I'm so sorry.
I went to a couple of games, and oddly enough, there was a game that stands out. It was the game when the Colts played San Francisco, and he had some really nice runs. Pulled off some 15, 20-yard runs, and like I said, he's running behind a really just awful offensive line. And I sort of thought to myself, maybe this kid's got potential. And sure enough, you shore up the offensive line, and you bring in a guy like Frank Reich, who certainly knows a lot about, obviously, the offensive side of the ball, and certainly how to scheme in running backs properly. Both he and Nick Sirianni both. I think look at Marlon Mack's production, and it's not surprising to me. And for me, he's got to be the starter. Just given that alone, given the production that he's had over the last few seasons, he has to be the starter. And then, as you said, what's certainly noteworthy is when Frank mentioned that, we won't be afraid to go with the hot hand.
For sure.
And if Jonathan Taylor, as you mentioned, comes in and starts to sort of just come onto the scene and surprise a lot of people and play better than Marlon Mack, or Marlon Mack, who, yes, has been, tremendous for you the last 2 seasons, but has also battled some injuries as well. I think that's certainly notable. And I think that's why they went and got a guy like Taylor. That's something that we've talked about, I know, on several occasions. And so, Marlon Mack to me is the starter. I agree. I don't see, unless Jonathan Taylor, like I said, just comes into training camp and absolutely blows everybody away. I think he's the starter. And then I think Taylor certainly gets his fair share of carries. And he posted something on Twitter, and I think it was maybe about a month ago. Said, what did he say? I'm trying to remember. Oh, it was about reps. Don't count the reps, make the reps count. And so I think that just shows his mentality and what he's really about. He's an all-in team player. And I think that Marlon Mack at the end of the day is going to be the starter for the majority of the season. I think he'll rush somewhere between 1,300 and 1,400 yards, maybe a little bit more. And I think Jonathan Taylor will get his fair share. 650, 750 is where I'm looking at for him. 2,000-yard rushers is a really hard thing to do. And so I think they'll both get both the running backs will get plenty of carries going into the season.
For sure. And that's something we even talked about, and we can go into this next, even about the kicking game. I mean, you got a new guy coming in with Rodrigo Blankenship, and then obviously you got Chase Mclaughlin, who is the incumbent starter from last year. He came in, near the end of the season, and I thought played pretty well, all things considered. I mean, he only missed one field goal in all his attempts. He made all his extra points. For me, I guess, and maybe you have a different opinion on this, Andrew, I'm kind of like, you have a guy who's proven that he can do it in the NFL. He's, and I feel like he handled the situation from bouncing around teams a little bit, kind of filling in when they needed kicking help, and then ultimately ending up with the Colts. I thought he performed really good. I really did. I liked his professionalism with everything, and a really hard, historically bad kicking situation last year where we didn't know if the Colts were going to make extra points for the majority of the season last year. And he came in and he performed great. And so I guess it's going to be different, obviously, because you're not going to keep both those kickers, but I think it's sort of similar in certain ways. My philosophy is, at least, if it's not broken, why are you trying to fix it? That's kind of where my thoughts are and where my head is. What are your thoughts on this kicking situation, Andrew?
Well, certainly, I think you look at last season, and it was, honestly, we love Vinatieri, but it was just a complete disaster. Let's call it what it is. It was a disaster from the very start. I think within the first two games, he missed 5 kicks in between field goals and extra points. And, Vinatieri, was sort of known for being Mr. Clutch. That's how he got the nickname, both with New England and Indianapolis. Back when he signed it with Indianapolis in 2006, I believe, he came in, and for the last, what's it been? 14 seasons, somewhere around there. He's been nothing other than this last season. Obviously, he's been money. And when he stepped down on the field, I think for a while, for the majority of his career, specifically in Indianapolis, I think a lot of people expected him to make those kicks, regardless of the distance, unless it was a ridiculous 64, 65-yard kick and a blizzard or something, unforeseen conditions or whatever. But normal circumstances, he was expected to make those kicks, and he made 80% of them. And then you look at last season and you think, had he made, I've talked about this before as well, had he made that kick against Miami, that extra point that he missed, the Colts aren't having to go march down the field and then and try and go for 2 just to tie the game, which against the Dolphins, don't get me started, it's just awful.
Oh, my gosh, Anyway. We were at that game. It was Derek and I. That's the first time we ever met in person. The worst game to ever go to. Brian Hoyer literally couldn't read a defense. Like, oh, my God. I could read a defense better than Brian Hoyer, and I don't even care to do that. So that tells you anything. But
it was bad. And Vinatieri didn't help. And then the game against Pittsburgh, where you're 5-2, you're playing well. Jacoby Brissett, although he went down that game with that knee injury, came back, but we felt like it wasn't all that serious. And had Vinatieri made that field goal to win the game, or would have clinched the game, you're 6-2, and who knows what happens from there. It's just 7-9, in my opinion, simply based off of special teams and kicks and just errant mistakes on that side of the ball, could have been 9-7, 10-6. I mean, with the way Jacksonville was playing, Tennessee was obviously good, and Houston, they were decent, but the Colts were too good roster-wise, team-wise, aside from maybe some injuries, as we mentioned earlier, on the receiving end, to not be a 9 or 10 win team. And I think when you look at all the things that contributed to the 7-9 season, special teams and kicking was certainly part of that. But to answer your main question, I think Chase Mclaughlin has a chance to come in. I think it's his spot to lose, honestly. I like Blankenship. I think he's got a chance. I didn't watch a ton of him while he was at Georgia, but from what I'm hearing, a lot of people really like him. A lot of people think he has a heck of a leg, and so hopefully we'll get to see that in action at training camp. And if anything, I don't think you can keep more than one kicker on the roster. But with practice squad rosters being expanded because of COVID, if you like to move forward with McLaughlin or Blankenship, maybe you should put the other one on the practice squad. And if Blankenship or McLaughlin or whoever is the starter goes down, you have a reliable backup waiting for you in the on the practice squad.
Yeah, for sure. That could be an option. Really quick, I want to go back to what we were talking about with just the kicking situation last year. There are certain games that, obviously there's a lot of blame going on the passing game. I think that was the biggest downfall of the Colts last year. But even what was the Chargers game? I wanted to say San Diego, but they're not San Diego anymore. But that Chargers game last year, he left a lot of points on the field last year. I mean, the Colts, obviously, they went to overtime and they lost. And I just have to think, if he makes even one more extra point than he missed, like he could miss an extra point. He missed multiple extra points that game. Yeah, if he makes just one more, we're not even talking about overtime. The Colts win. So I don't really fault him for that Pittsburgh game because I think it was partially blocked, if I'm not mistaken, that field goal. But yeah, there was a lot of moments last year where you're just shaking your head. I mean, I've never just been so afraid. Like, we've just had it so good as Colts fans for the past decade with Adam Vinatieri that we're just like, oh, he's going to make it. Like, there's literally times where, like, they're going to line up for a field goal. I'm like, they're going to make it. Like, there's no point even watching. And I would be shocked if they missed it. And so I think that was just crazy. Like, my blood pressure, that Chargers game, I think that was my blood pressure rose the most it's probably ever risen watching an NFL game in the past few years. Is just crazy because that was just such a back and forth game all day long. I mean, it was just wild to me. But we can move on here to the next question. Justin talks about, he throws out a name, DeMichael Harris. I've heard this name a couple times mentioned by a couple different people. I think it was the Frank Reich press conference that Derek was in. Somebody asked about DeMichael Harris, and Frank Reich had some nice things to say about him. He's an undrafted free agent. He was, according to Justin, he was converted from running back. He's a wide receiver now. I just don't know in terms of roster spot. I just don't think that there's really any room for an undrafted free agent, unfortunately. I just think, and this is good for the Colts, like they just have so much depth at that position. Like I think I could honestly say confidently, at least from what I think, I could probably predict the top 5 receivers for the Colts team this year. That's just how deep this position group is. Do you have any thoughts on DeMichael Harris and maybe what he could contribute? It'd probably be a practice squad guy, if anything. What do you think he can contribute, and how do you think he could potentially, maybe down the line in a couple of years, help this Colts team?
Yeah, I'm sort of with you right now. I think he's more of a practice squad player. Now I haven't heard too much about him. And before I go into it, I want to make sure I'm aware. Is this a player that's currently on the Colts, or is he?
Yeah, he's currently on the Colts.
Okay,
he was signed as an undrafted free agent. He was with that crop of people brought in by the Colts this year. Yeah.
Okay, that's what. So, yeah, to me, he's a practice squad guy. Now I look at a guy like Reese Fountain, somebody that came in during last training camp, last offseason, and performed quite well, sort of exceeded everybody's expectations. And I think if a guy like DeMichael Harris can come in and get an opportunity to show what he's capable of, converting from running back to wide receiver, maybe he's got a chance for that 6th spot. But to me, as you mentioned earlier, I think you give Ashton Dulin simply for the special teams versatility that he brings. To me, I agree. I think he's a practice squad guy. And then maybe moving forward, if he proves himself and Chris Ballard, likes him and the team likes him, then maybe they move forward and they bring him in and see what he can do. But for now, as you mentioned, I think the Colts have too much depth, which is actually a good problem for once in that receiving corps.
For sure. I'd honestly probably put Reese Fountain and Ashton Dulin above DeMichael Harris and maybe even another receiver thrown in there too. It's just I don't know a whole lot about him, so I just don't know what we could say beyond he's probably going to be a practice squad guy, if anything. Nomadic Brian's in here. Hey, thanks for joining us, man. He says, how about plus 500 total yards receiving, over 3,800? So I'm assuming he's talking about 3,800 passing yards and 500 total yards receiving. What are your thoughts, Andrew, on this?
Is he talking about the Colts offense entirely? Or is he talking about?
I'm wondering if he's talking about one of the players that we were mentioning.
Yeah,
because we're kind of behind on the comments a little bit, so that might be why.
I apologize, Brian. No matter.
Yeah, sorry, we're kind of catching up now. Maybe if he clarifies that, we'll be able to answer that a little better. Sure. Jennifer adds, at least having more weapons can take a lot of pressure off of Hilton. I agree. I think that's going to be a big thing for Hilton. He has not had a person to help take off that pressure really at all since he's been drafted. I mean, he's had occasional guys that'll do some decent things, but overall, yeah, it would be great for T.Y. Hilton to have one or even two guys, potentially three, to help take the pressure off this year. Tequil says, I'm also excited about the defense, especially Big 99. Yeah, Buckner's going to be a huge addition. He's going to be, I mean, if you just seen pictures of him in training camp, this dude is a monster. He is a tower. He's 6'7", 300 pounds. I mean, he's just going to – you just look at that three technique position last year, and it's like I think that position in particular obviously was the biggest weakness last year on this defense, and now it's potentially going to be one of the best. And that's what Chris Ballard does, right? He turns the Colts position groups, the weaknesses into strengths. He did it with the offensive line, did it with the running back, potentially does it with the quarterback, maybe the wide receivers like we mentioned, defensive line. He already did it with the linebackers. He's got a lot of good things that he's done in his couple of years here with Indianapolis.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, go ahead.
DeForest Buckner, yeah, I couldn't agree more. You look at his production over the last several years in San Francisco. And Chris Ballard mentioned this. I think he spoke with Colts media members last week or the week before, and he had mentioned, you just look at the tape. Look at the Super Bowl. I mean, the guy was constantly in Pat Mahomes' face, and, Patrick Mahomes did Patrick Mahomes things. But,
right.
DeForest Buckner, I think, had a couple sacks and was certainly, if you remember that 30-15 play where I think the play call was like jet wasp and Tyreek Hill was running like a deep post route or a deep over route of some sort where he had to come back for the ball. But anyways, Patrick Mahomes ended up having to just fling it off of his back foot. And if you go back and you review that specific place very carefully, you'll see that 99's in his face. And he was everywhere. And I think he's going to bring just a completely different dynamic to this Colts defense. As you mentioned, Cody, with the three technique being just so sort of, it was a revolving door, and it was an issue that the Colts couldn't really figure out. Autry had that really big year the season prior, and I think that's something that I know we certainly expected last season for him to sort of step up and improve off of that or from that, and that just didn't happen. And so I think, as you mentioned, Chris Ballard packaged together that first-round pick and said, here you go, San Francisco. Oddly enough, I think it was that 13th overall pick that ended up being Javon Kendall. So
yeah, they just drafted his replacement. So
yeah, exactly. There you go. Exactly. But no, I agree. To Kale. My apologies, as Cody mentioned earlier, if I mispronounced your name. No, I agree. DeForest Buckner's he's going to be a problem.
I mean, yeah, just for what the Colts gave up, I think that's initially already a win. I mean, considering what certain players have, had garnered, like the value, multiple first-round picks for Jamal Adams. And if Bill O'Brien was a competent GM, he would have got a couple first-round picks for DeAndre Hopkins. So the Colts, we think, got a steal. I mean, we really think they do. They give away one draft pick, and essentially you're getting the same player, same position group, rather, that you would have drafted anyway. And you're getting a guy that's more proven. He's been a first-team and second-team All-Pro. He's just coming into his prime now, so I think it's certainly a win for the Colts. Guys, before we continue reading these questions out, if you haven't yet, we'd love for you to subscribe to us. We're almost to 2,500 subscribers, which is absolutely insane. Andrew, I know we were probably a year ago, we were on this podcast. We weren't even probably halfway to 1,000 at this point, and now we're over almost to 2,500. It's absolutely been wild. So if you guys haven't done that, be sure to do that. And also, we'd love for you if you like this stream. I'm sure our boy Tristan will be in here in a little bit telling you guys to like this stream. So don't let Tristan yell at you. Just do it before he yells at you. We'll keep going here. Jack's in here. Jack was on our podcast a couple weeks ago. He was on our first subscriber podcast. Thanks for checking us out again, Jack. We appreciate you, man. I think I already said Miles is in here. He's probably saying hi to Zach. Young Gun's in here. He says, "What's up? Hello. Good to see you." All right. Yep. Miles is talking about Pascal. Okay. Bernardo. He says, Kenny Moore will be key to our secondary getting slimmed down with Tell's opt-out. Only weak spot on the team. I mean, I think certainly just the secondary in general for me is the biggest question mark on this defense. And Derek and I talked about it. It's not like we think it's going to be bad. It's just there's a lot of young guys, and there's even some of the veterans they brought in. There's just some unprovenness right now with this secondary. I mean, you got Xavier Rhodes, who has had a couple rough seasons with the Vikings his last couple of years. Even Malik Hooker, he kind of had some up and down moments last year. Julian Blackman is injured this year, or last year. He's going to be injured for the good portion of this year, we think. So obviously the questions on, is he going to get fully recovered? How's he going to look when he's finally back into game action? And then Rock Ya-Sin, obviously, he had an up and down year. He played a lot better at the end of the year. How does he do in year two? That's a question mark for me too. So there's just a lot of different question marks. And obviously Marvell Tell's decision to opt out, it hurts. It definitely stinks that he decided to do that. But obviously if he feels like he wants to take care of himself, we can't fault him for that. But that certainly is a position that got a little bit more thinned down with Marvell Tell's loss. Andrew, I don't think I've asked you your thoughts on how significant of a loss you think Marvell Tell is for this Colts team this year.
Yeah, I think you look at a guy like Tell who converted from safety to corner, and the way that he came in last season, I think he was a fifth-round pick, and he played. I think he played pretty well. Given, I think Kenny Moore was injured at one point. I don't think he stepped in for him, but I think Kenny Moore was injured for a game or two, and then Rock Ya-Sin was sort of, kind of up and down as you mentioned, especially at the beginning of the season. And I think you bring in a guy like Tell. And I think he stepped in and played pretty well given the circumstances. One game that stands out was the game against Pittsburgh. I think he's certainly a great open field tackler. I think he forced a fumble even. So he's certainly a player. I know that when we were talking, I think this was last month or whenever we did the defensive back training camp predictions, that was a guy that you had on your radar. And I think that a lot of Colts media and Colts Nation and fans everywhere expect Tell to come in and certainly improve off of year one. And I think with him opting out, as you said, if choosing himself and his family over football, you certainly can't fault him for that. But I think it's a bigger loss than what some people may think.
Yeah, and I mean, some people were even going as far as saying, could Marvell Tell potentially take that number 2 corner position away from Xavier Rhodes this season? The people were going that far. Some people were a lot more higher on Marvell Tell than probably a good majority of Colts fans are, but nonetheless, it's definitely a significant loss because you definitely saw him, his improvement, even in year one, and definitely was on the trend, like Rock Ya-Sin, to have a better year too. But so that hurts a little bit. Rich asked a question. He says, you guys know, this is interesting, you guys know that Rivers is literally at least as good as Andrew Luck. I don't know if I'd go that far right now. I mean, obviously he is because Andrew Luck's not in the league, but I mean, last season or a couple of seasons ago, I mean, they were both top quarterbacks in 2018. I mean, they really were. I felt like Rivers had a little bit more around him in terms of his receivers than Andrew Luck did. And obviously, Melvin Gordon, that doesn't hurt to have him in the backfield as well. But obviously, Rivers had a tough year last year. I mean, with the interceptions, his touchdowns dipped and his interceptions grew, and that's never good. So, Andrew, what are your thoughts on Phillip Rivers? I guess I'll kind of phrase it to this question. And Rich clarifies, he says, I'm in Kansas City. So maybe he's a Chiefs fan. He sees Phillip Rivers a lot. Do you think Rivers has the potential to get back to that 2018 form? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, absolutely. I think he does. You mentioned that 2018 form, which consisted of 32 passing touchdowns and only 10 interceptions, over 4,500 yards. I mean, he was – and mind you, this is behind one of the worst offensive lines in football. The guy's a statue. Andrew Luck could move. Phillip Rivers can't. So for him to be able to – now, granted, I think that was part of the offensive scheme that Los Angeles had in place for Rivers, I think was certainly beneficial, getting the ball out a lot quicker than normal or than what he was used to in previous years. But as far as, I guess, the first part of the question, Phillip Rivers being better than Andrew Luck, uh, that to me, I'm with you, Cody. I wouldn't go that far. I mean, I look at Andrew Luck's first 3 years. I mean, I wrote about this just a couple of months ago for Stampede Blue, and I mentioned he came in and the roster was just a complete, we did a podcast about this actually, now that I remember. The roster was a complete dumpster fire. And the guy went 11-5, 11-5, 11-5 with the worst offensive line, no running game, and his best receiver was T.Y. Hilton. And that's no indictment on T.Y. Hilton by any means. I mean, obviously the guy's a stud, but other than he and maybe Costanza, who was a second and third-year offensive tackle, Andrew Luck carried that football team. But no, Phillip Rivers, I think he's certainly behind this Colts offensive line with the requisite weapons, that he has around him, with the running back group that he has with Mack and Taylor and even Wilkins. I think he certainly has a good chance to return to that 2018 form. And now it's just up to you, Frank Reich, and Nick Sirianni to put it all together.
Mm-hmm. Lawrence clarifying. So Jeff Saturday was also an undrafted free agent, which I talked about. So originally was from Baltimore, and then he came to the Colts. So another piece that the Colts had, obviously a key part of that offensive line in that Super Bowl team. He obviously had the block against Vince Wilfork in that 2006 championship game. So certainly significant. Justin agreeing with us, losing Tell is big for depth. Let's see.
The interesting thing about Tell, if I may bring this up just real quickly.
Sure.
As I mentioned, he converted from safety to corner. And I was on the NFL app the other day, and I was looking at some of the Colts stats from last year, and they were 30th, Cody, in opposing passer ratings allowed by quarterbacks. Malik Hooker allowed over a 92 passer rating last year to opposing quarterbacks all season long. And it was just, that's awful.
That's so bad.
So, maybe with the way that Tell was playing and the Colts not picking up Malik Hooker's fifth-year option, maybe they would have considered getting Tell or letting Tell stand in at free safety for a game or two and maybe challenge Hooker for that spot. But, I agree with you, Justin. Losing Tell is definitely big in terms of depth. I think that's why they went out and signed former Lions safety Tavon Wilson to maybe come in and play safety. And maybe, I don't think he's played corner, but, if push comes to shove, maybe he can play a little corner for you too.
Mm-hmm. Rich talking about Rivers. He said there's only one guy that put more fear into us. So he is a Chiefs fan. He said there's only one guy that put more fear in us than the Patriots, and that is Rivers. So definitely good to get a Chiefs fan's perspective on Phillip Rivers. Has high praise for him. Okay, Bernardo. He asked, is there still a good free agent to sign that can help our secondary? Obviously, the Colts just signed a couple of days ago Tavon Wilson, who is a veteran in the league. He started out with the Patriots and most recently with the Lions for a couple seasons. So he's a guy that adds a little bit more to that safety room. But I still think the Colts are going to add at corner. Obviously, they had a couple guys in the other day for workouts. I think it was either yesterday or the day before. The Colts had a couple different guys in for workouts. I'm going to pull up their names here. Are there any other names, Andrew, that really stand out to you? I mean, we posted a video, Bernardo, a couple weeks ago on ways the Colts can replace Marvell Tell. So if you haven't, be sure to check out that video. We list a whole bunch of guys that we think the Colts could potentially do that. Andrew, are there any guys that stand out to you? I know Logan Ryan's a big name, but are there any other guys that stand out to you?
Yeah, the thing with Logan Ryan is he's more of a slot corner.
Right.
With Kenny Moore or TJ Carey being there, in my opinion, Logan Ryan isn't the right option. Not that he can't come in, or couldn't come in and maybe play some outside for you, but he's been most successful in the slot throughout his career, both with the Patriots and the Tennessee Titans. And then I don't remember his first name, but Tankersley, I believe is how you pronounce his last name.
Yeah, that was one of the guys the Colts brought in, Cordera Tankersley.
Yes, he was a former third-round pick for the Miami Dolphins, if I'm not mistaken, just a few years ago. Yep. And, a third-round pick that's pretty high, especially for a corner. So maybe, Chris Ballard has certainly found plenty of diamonds in the rough, if you will, with Kenny Moore and Zach Pascal. And so I think maybe he goes out knowing that Tell is no longer a part of the team, at least for 2020. And he goes out and maybe gives, like Tankersley, a third-round pick a chance.
Yeah, and the other guys they brought in, Tremont Smith, Brandon Williams, Andre I can't even say his last name. I'll just spell it. Chachere, Chichere, maybe? I don't know. But those are the other guys along with Tankersley that the Colts brought in this offseason. Will be interesting to see if they indeed sign one of these guys. I mean, initially when the Colts brought in those other two guys that they signed, Taylor Stallworth and then obviously Tavon Wilson, the COVID-19 mandate basically said, if you bring in guys to work out, you got to sign them. Well, they kind of dropped that now, and so the Colts can and other teams can host different guys now, which I think is kind of crazy that they did that a couple days after the Colts decided to sign these guys. But now the Colts can host some people, work out some players, kind of make the best option for their football team. But I think Tankersley would be my first option. There's some other veteran names in there that maybe the Colts look at. Be sure to check out that video, like I mentioned, Bernardo. It's a really good one. Derek and I talk about that. Well, Rich is talking all about all about the Colts. Oh, Derek's in here. What's up, Derek?
Hey, Derek.
I thought he told me he was going to bed at 8. He's such a liar, Derek. No, it's all right. Thanks for coming in, man. He said, "Gotta catch you real quick before I go to bed. Smash the dang like button, everyone." Yes, that is true. Go. If Derek was in here, he would say those exact words. He'd say, "Hit the dang like button." So there's 38 of you in here. There should be 38 at least likes. So stop what you're doing right now. Hit the like button. It's literally as easy as tapping one button. So, Derek's asking about Brissett's comments today. Did you see these comments from Jacoby Brissett today? I thought they were interesting. And I commented on it, and now I kind of feel like a jerk a little bit for commenting because I didn't intend to basically cut Jacoby Brissett, but I feel like my comment maybe looked like it was a little bit, but that wasn't my intention. But basically, yeah, Brissett was talking about. I'm going to pull it up here. He said he was super surprised when he got the call from Frank Reich this offseason saying that the Colts were going to sign Phillip Rivers. And so I responded and basically said, the Colts had one of the worst passing attacks in the league last year. I don't think it was really a surprise. I wasn't trying to cut Brissett. I was trying to say I don't think it's really a surprise to Colts fans that the Colts felt like they need to upgrade at quarterback. Now I know you can talk about the wide receivers. That's been a big argument for Colts fans. But look at what Andrew Luck had, man. He had nothing, and he still made plays. He still brought his team to the brink of a Super Bowl with literally no receivers outside of T.Y. Hilton. Coby Fleener couldn't even get 1 yard after the catch. I think he averaged probably that. He could not do that. Dwayne Allen couldn't catch to save his life. And I don't even remember who the other receivers were on this team. That just tells you how rough that season was. Didn't have a running game. Didn't have a GM, didn't have a defense, didn't have a coach that would, help him out. Andrew Luck just did incredible things with literally nothing. And so I know that some of those things can be questioned about that wide receiver group, and that can be an argument. But for me, it's okay, if you are the franchise quarterback, you got to work with what you're given. You still had Marlon Mack for most of the year. You still had Nyheim Hines. You still had Jack Doyle. You still had some targets. I think I lost you there, Andrew.
Oh, no, I'm here.
I just lost your picture.
Okay.
But you still had a few targets that you could rely on. That's just kind of my thoughts. But, again, I want to clarify by saying I'm glad Jacoby Brissett feels like he has confidence because he also added a little bit more about how he feels like he can be a starter in this league, and maybe he can for a few teams. I honestly look at Jacoby Brissett, for me, his chance to be a starter will probably come down to if there's a team that kind of needs a bridge type of quarterback, maybe he can step in and be that bridge quarterback for a season or two. What are your thoughts on Jacoby Brissett's comments today, Andrew? I'm curious.
Yeah, I was a bit surprised, I think, like most people, by his comments. I think, and I read your tweet, and I just from another person's perspective, I suppose, I certainly didn't think you were trying to take any sort of cheap shots at Jacoby Brissett. But, I'm a journalist, and in my profession, we're the idea, what we're supposed to do is give our opinions, and that's part of the job. And so I think, when people give their opinions of players, and players, tend to get upset. Not that Brissett got upset, I should say, or necessarily, but as you said, Andrew Luck played with Levon Brazil, Donnie Avery, Derek Rogers.
Gosh, I forgot those guys.
anymore. I mean, my gosh. And it's like he got, like you said, he's on the brink of the Super Bowl. And so if it were me and I made those comments, I mean, I don't feel bad. You know, I watch, I don't know if you do, Cody, pardon me, the Kevin's Corner with Kevin Bowen.
Yeah.
Fantastic podcast, by the way, guys. If you haven't checked them out, you don't know what I'm talking about. Apple Podcasts. If you've got a Galaxy, I'm sure there's a way you can find it on there too. And then 1% Better with Stephen Holder and Zach Keefer. All tremendous people, fantastic journalists, people I've gotten to know a little personally. And they actually just shared their thoughts recently with because they like us, they take questions, and some of the questions they've gotten recently have been about Jacoby Brissett, and they've said similar things. You know, he didn't play very well, and that's just to me, that shouldn't have been a surprise. Like, yes, the knee injury, as you said, can be brought up for an argument. The receiving core can be brought up as an argument, but it's like, to me, I wasn't surprised. I honestly was hoping, and that's not to say that Jacoby Brissett isn't a solid player and he's not a solid leader, but for the amount of money that you were paying him to be your backup, I was hoping that the Colts were going to either trade him for a solid pick or part ways with him. I mean, I didn't think, given the level of production and just how awful it was last year for Brissett, I didn't think holding on to him for, what was it, $15+ million or something close to that was worth it in terms of the salary cap hit. And so, no, I certainly wasn't surprised that the Colts brought in Phillip Rivers, but I was a little shocked at Brissett's comments.
Yeah, I know. It was kind of like, I don't know. I mean, I think Brissett obviously feels like he played decent in moments. I felt like last year, like he was efficient in moments. But I mean, I don't fault Brissett because obviously you have to have confidence in yourself, and you want to feel like, yeah, I feel like I can still be a starter in this league. But for me, it's kind of like, okay, he's 27, 28 years old. We've seen kind of what he is, and that's okay. Like, he was never brought in with the idea that he was going to be the franchise quarterback. So we shouldn't put that pressure on him. And that's kind of where I stand on Brissett. But you're right. We are paying him a lot this season. I want him to be able to feel like he can go to a team where maybe he has a shot at starting. And so that's why I kind of think he's obviously big for this season because of just everything with COVID, and he knows this system. So the Colts have a solid backup quarterback this season, and Jacob Eason is continuing to develop this year. But yeah, for me, I kind of agree with you, Andrew. I mean, that's why I didn't delete the tweet, because I was like, I mean, that's my opinion. Like, you don't have to like it, but I mean, that's reality. Exactly. So
yeah. And the thing about it is too, Cody, and this is certainly not a shot at Jacoby Brissett. I want to make that abundantly clear. Similar, but the only place that I can see him playing is New England. And listen, when Bill Belichick traded him for Phillip Dorsett was largely considered a bust amongst many NFL experts and journalists and players and whoever else. But he wasn't very good. Now, granted, he's played pretty well since coming to New England, but that's neither here nor there. The other thing I'll say too is there was a reason Belichick drafted him, but there's also a reason he was third on the depth chart, behind Jimmy Garoppolo and behind Tom Brady. Like, if Bill Belichick really thought Jacoby Brissett could have been the answer moving forward, especially after trading Jimmy Garoppolo, to the San Francisco 49ers, don't you think he would have tried to get more out of him? And that's not to say that he's not a good leader. That's not to say that he can't be a quality player. But given what we've seen from him this past season and in 2017 as well, now you don't just have now 2017. Obviously, the roster wasn't nearly as good, but you still have, if Jacoby Brissett was like Andrew Luck, a kind of player that could carry an awful team, the Colts wouldn't have been 4-12 in 2017. They would have been 11-5 like they were with Luck. But he wasn't that good. As I mentioned, I'm not trying to repeat myself a bunch of times. It's not to say that he can't be a good player elsewhere, but I like you, Cody, I just don't, I don't see it.
Yeah. And we say this honestly, Andrew, you as a journalist and me as somebody who tries to be very objective. I'm a fan, yes, but I try to be objective in my opinions. We say this with literally no emotion tied to it. I mean, it really is just facts at this point. Like, that's just kind of what our thoughts are on Brissett, and, take it or leave it. But I mean, that's kind of where we stand on that. Okay. So a couple other guys, Miles says Derek Lawrence. Who's this Derek guy in the chat? I don't know who he is. He's a weirdo. Justin says, we need to make sure Wilkins gets an adequate number of snaps for his talent. I just don't know where those snaps are going to come, honestly. He's a number 4 running back now.
Yeah.
Like, Jonathan Williams was a number 4 running back last year. He was a healthy scratch until injuries happened. So I think unless another injury happens to one of these top running backs, I don't see Jordan Wilkins really getting many snaps this season. It really stinks, though, because Jordan Wilkins, his rushing yards, his per average is phenomenal. I mean, it's one of the tops in the league. He's great when he gets the ball in his hands, but he's just behind a couple really good guys, and Marlon Mack and Jonathan Taylor. And that's just kind of how it is. It kind of stinks. Obviously, he had a little bit more of a chance his rookie year when Mack got injured, but obviously he fumbled it a little bit and kind of got his snaps reduced a little bit. But yeah, I like Jordan Wilkins. What are your thoughts on Jordan Wilkins overall as a player? Let's think more so next year. So Marlon Mack decides to go elsewhere. Let's just stay in this hypothetical. Marlon Mack goes somewhere else. What does it look like for Jordan Wilkins in his snaps next year potentially?
Well, I certainly think if, as you mentioned with the hypothetical scenario, with Matt going elsewhere, and now you have Taylor is probably your number 1. Hines is probably your number 2, but I don't think Wilkins is a close. I don't think Wilkins is far behind Hines, and that's not to say that I think that Hines and Wilkins are similar players in terms of skill set. But to me, Wilkins I think is a quality player. I think he maybe gives Hines some quality competition if that is indeed the scenario moving forward into the 2021 season and beyond. Pardon me, but as you said, his per average, his average yards per carry, to me, it's and this is with, as Cody you mentioned earlier, with like no emotion tied behind it. I think he's might be a product of the offensive line. Like, the Colts offensive line is just that good, and I could run behind that offensive line. Now,
right.
I'm not now. I want to be clear. I'm not saying I'm Jordan Wilkins or Nyheim Hines, or I'm not nearly as fast as them by any means. I want to make that clear. But I mean, it's like that's just the truth. That's my opinion. Yeah, that's just. I mean, in my opinion,
it shows because you can bring in a guy, an undrafted free agent, and Jonathan Williams, and he can have 2 back-to-back 100-yard rushing games. That's how good this offensive line is. They can make any of your running backs look phenomenal. Right. I mean, that's just kind of how it is.
No, but Jordan's a good player.
He is. Yeah, he definitely is. Lawrence brings a good stat into here. He says, over the past 2 seasons, Marlon Mack is 5th in the NFL in yards per carry after contact. A stat many fans don't realize. Now, I think that was his rookie year. Kind of something that we felt like he needed to improve on was his running between the tackles, right? The hard type of running. Because we always felt like Marlon Mack had a lot of talent. He was very physically gifted. He was very fast. But we felt like he needed to get a little bit stronger in terms of, breaking tackles, running, after contact. And he's done a phenomenal job. He really improved. He's really improved in the couple of years he's been in the league. And credit Tom Rathman, the running backs coach. I mean, he has done phenomenal work with these running backs. And Marlon Mack is just one guy that is so underrated and not talked about, I feel like. But he can go out there and he can change a game. We saw that in week 1 last year against the Chargers. Marlon Mack, he can outrun everybody. He's just got that kind of speed. Now, he doesn't have the kind of speed of Harris Campbell or Nyheim Hines, but he's still a game breaker type of running back. Show me your love, Andrew, for Marlon Mack and what he's done with the Colts and just his improvement. I'm curious your thoughts on his improvement since his rookie year now in going into his 3rd season.
I think he's vastly improved, as you mentioned, especially with those yards after contact. That's certainly a key area, coming off of his rookie season that I think he sort of struggled with. Now, granted, he wasn't running behind nearly as good enough of an offensive line as he is now. But I think Marlon Mack is the kind of player, as you mentioned, that doesn't really get the kind of recognition that he rightfully deserves. He's not the Saquon Barkley and Ezekiel Elliott's of the world. He wasn't drafted in the 1st round, top 5 overall, so he doesn't get talked about because he's a 4th round pick. But man, when you're running behind that Colts offensive line and you're running right behind Costanzo and Big Q and Nelson, and Kelly, and Glowinski and Smith and Chris Strauser, the offensive line coach. I think major credit to him because, as you mentioned, Frank Reich said that he wanted to be a top, I think it was top 7, top 5 rushing team.
Top 5, yeah. They were 7.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I think Mack is just a very underrated player. I don't think he's as good of a pass catcher as I'd like him to be personally. Not that he's bad, not that he's has butter for hands, but I think that's something that he can maybe improve on. Certainly, I think he's continuing to prove with his running in between the tackles and not being so quick to jump cut and bounce it outside and what have you. But I think moving forward, just to kind of extend this a bit more, I think the Colts would be kind of silly to for the right price to let Mack go elsewhere. I think he and Jonathan Taylor, I think, have a chance to really put the league on notice, barring health and all of the things that you can't really predict. And so I think after the 2020 season, should Marlon Mack be as productive or even more productive than he was this past season, I see no reason why the Colts shouldn't at least offer him a healthy extension.
Yeah, for sure. And mentioning Marlon Mack, we already touched on what if he leaves. I mean, you got to look at all the free agent running backs next season. I mean, honestly, at first I was like, when the Colts drafted Jonathan Taylor, I was like, Mack's going to be gone after this year. There's no question. But then I looked at all these running backs. I mean, it's crazy. You got Kenyon Drake. You got Joe Mixon. You got Kareem Hunt. You got Phillip Lindsay, Aaron Jones, Leonard Fournette. You got Damian Williams. Dalvin Cook is another name. There's other guys too. I'm just kind of going down the list. James Conner, another notable name as well. Those are kind of the big names. And then Marlon Mack. And so there's going to be – I feel like Marlon Mack for the right price should come back to Indianapolis. It makes the most sense for him. It's going to help him with his durability, I feel like, because he has, like we mentioned, he's had a little bit of durability concerns overall because he just – and it's just kind of – he's just been a little bit fragile at certain points and had some kind of weird injuries at points. And so I think the addition of Jonathan Taylor is going to help in that. They're going to take the load off of each other. Jonathan Taylor had so many runs at Wisconsin, and I think it's just going to be a great way for them to help each other be more productive and be more efficient with their runs, and also help in the health standpoint. So when they're down there in the playoffs, they still have some pretty fairly healthy and pretty fresh legs at that running back position.
Oh, for sure. And if I may just say one more thing in regards to Mack, in the NFL, the running back shelf life is very, very thin, very short. And you don't typically see NFL running backs unless you're, as I mentioned earlier, a Saquon Barkley or an Ezekiel Elliott get paid quality money. You just don't see it, especially for guys that are like Marlon Mack who were picked in the 4th round. And so, as you mentioned, Cody, I think it's best for Marlon Mack to come back to Indianapolis, not only for commodity reasons, or not commodity reasons, but because he's a because he's a proven commodity for this Colts offense, but also because Chris Ballard takes care of his own. We've seen that time and time again with Kenny Moore, with Pierre Desir at one point, and some other guys as well. I see no reason, as I mentioned earlier, why the Colts maybe shouldn't consider bringing Mack back.
Mm-hmm. For sure. All right. We got a lot of comments that we got to catch up on, but we'll get to this one. We'll talk about this briefly. I like the name, first off. Good name. He says, Colts have so much potential. I just don't expect us to not blow a stupid game or two. We're going to be the 4th seed or under. The Colts I feel like every year the Colts have 1 or 2 games that are just really stupid losses. They just come out of nowhere. Last year, obviously, that Miami game was a very stupid loss. And I honestly would say there were some other games potentially that were stupid losses as well. I mean, the Jacksonville game the year before, stupid loss. You were on that winning streak. You go there, you lay an egg in Jacksonville. Stupid loss. Lots of dumb stuff like that. Do you think the Colts will have another stupid loss or two this year? Because there's potentially some teams that I'm not really sure. I don't really have a gauge on them. I don't know. They could be really good or they could be not so good. What are your thoughts on, do you think the Colts will have maybe a stupid loss or two this year?
I honestly, when I look at those stupid losses that you mentioned from last year, I think a majority of that can be blamed on special teams and kicking. I know this is something we mentioned earlier. Now, that's not, to say that it's entirely Vinatieri's fault, but I think the Dolphin losses I mentioned earlier with that extra point and not having to drive down and score the touchdown in the the 2-point conversion to tie the game. And then there's one other game that I'm having a hard time thinking of that was just a really dumb loss last year. Just something that you just kind of scratch your head.
Even maybe that Tampa Bay game, because they were up by like 10 at halftime.
Right. Well, and it's funny, it kind of reminded me of those couple of games. It reminded me of the 2017 Colts that were 4-12 and could have been 7-9 or 6-10 or 8-8 because they had the halftime. They had the lead at halftime in every single one of their games. And then I guess in the second half, they just decided, 20 points is good. We'll be okay. And just decided not to play. But no, but with no, I don't see honestly, barring health and like I said, some things I mentioned earlier that you can't really predict moving forward. I think the Colts, there's no reason, in my opinion, why they can't not only win the AFC South, but win 11 or 12 games. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I really, really like this Colts team, like from a objective position, from not a fan position, from the way that Chris Ballard has built this team, as we've talked about multiple times, Cody, on the podcast, from the ground up, from the offensive line to the defensive line to the secondary. To me, it's too good of a roster to not be at least a 9-win team or above. Anything less than that, to me, is a major disappointment, unless you just have a slew of injuries that you can't really control.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep. Thanks, everybody, for joining the chat. Like Derek said, it's great to see you all in here. So Lawrence talks about Jordan Wilkins and about how he averages 5.8 yards per carry over the past 2 seasons. I mean, that's the most for any running back over 50 carries in the season. So that kind of adds to our argument. Jordan Wilkins is a good player. I just don't know how much snaps he's going to get. Ramon, thanks for joining us. Ramon, sorry if I messed that up. Jennifer agrees. Do we have to relive that Miami game? We don't have to. We don't have to talk about it anymore. Let's not talk about it. Tristan. Hey, Cody. What's up, Tristan? Thanks for joining us, man. Our unofficial mod, we call you. Appreciate it. I just looked a little bit ago, Tristan. There's one dislike on there. So you got to use your fear tactics to scare that person to removing that dislike. All right. Let's
Probably
see.
my brother.
Just coming on to screw with us.
Yeah.
We definitely had somebody on the live stream earlier this week that kept disliking just because I think they were just trolling us. They would dislike, and then I'd check again, and it would be like on. And I was like, what is going on? All right, let's keep going here. I lost my my chat thing, took me all the way. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, here's one from Justin. He says, I think the only undrafted free agents who have a chance to make this roster are Blankenship, Carter O'Donnell, he's an offensive tackle if you weren't familiar, or Kendall Coleman. Donald Rutledge also has a chance to sign, or since Milligan opted out. Sorry, that's a little confusing. I don't think Rutledge does anymore because obviously Tavon Wilson was signed. So I think he's a practice squad guy. Blankenship definitely has a shot. I think he's the one that has the biggest shot. Carter O'Donnell maybe for offensive tackle depth. The Colts don't have a ton right now, so I could see him potentially making the roster for those purposes. Kendall Coleman, I have a hard time putting Kendall Coleman on this list. There's been a lot of love for Kendall Coleman over these last couple months, but for me, similar to the wide receiver group, this defensive end group, I just don't know where he fits. I mean, it's just so crowded at this point. Now, he may be really talented, but I think you can afford to stash him on the practice squad this season, and if an injury or two happens, bring him up and see what he's got. I mean, that's kind of where I am right now. All right. Okay, good. Kale said we did a good job on his name. That's good.
Oh.
Bernardo asked another question. Xavier Rhodes get back to his level, this team can make a deep playoff run. Heck, if he gets back to 75% of what he was a couple of years ago, that secondary is going to be – I said it could potentially be a weakness. It could be a strength at that point. If he can get back to that level, 75%, even 50%, that's still a pretty decent cornerback. And we think Rocky Ascend's going to ascend. I mean, it really, for me, is going to hinge more so on Xavier Rhodes for this corner room. more than any of these other guys. So Lavoine agreeing with us there. Eddie talked about Marlon Mack, most underrated running back. He's definitely is underrated. I really think he is. Fiddy Rap, thanks for joining us, man. Yes, it's a late night stream. Not really super late, but it's later than we had, so I'm just going to call it a late night stream. Mike Honcho thinks Xavier Rhodes is not getting back to his old self. All right, well, that's okay. You can have your opinion there. I don't think he's going to either, like fully, because I think he's been injured. He's older, but if he can get back at least a fraction of that, I think it's going to be good. He's only signed to a 1-year deal.
Well, the one thing I will say, if you don't mind, Cody, with Xavier Rhodes, the one thing that I think is noteworthy is in Minnesota they played a lot of man coverage.
Yeah.
Whereas in Indianapolis, it's a lot of zone. It's a Tampa 2-based scheme where it's essentially predicated on specifically that 3 technique and that defensive line pressure. And I think you have guys. I think Xavier Rhodes, honestly, as you know, somewhat similar to what you had said. I don't think he has to get back to that 100%. I think if he gets back to 60 to 75%, and I think having guys like Darius Leonard, Kamoka Ture, Justin Houston, and DeForest Buckner really coming in and making things easier for you potentially, I think that's potentially going to help him. He's also with his former defensive back coach, and I'm kind of drawing a blank on the name.
Jonathan Gannon is the name.
Yeah.
Don't ask me how I know that, but it's just locked away in my memory.
Yeah, and I think that'll certainly help him. So I think he's got a number of things going for him. And I think people forget 2 or 3 years ago he was a first-team All-Pro. I mean, we're not talking a corner that's dropped off after 6 or 8 seasons. You're talking a couple of seasons. Just a couple of seasons ago, he was considered one of the best corners in football, and I think he could certainly, given the right opportunity, which I think is right here in Indianapolis, could exceed the expectation.
Yeah, and he was injured last year. He even admitted, I had a bad season last year. He said, I was injured. And I think that if he can get fully back to healthy, maybe he can recapture a little bit of that form that he had a couple of years ago. Nomadic Brian asked a question. So what are your over-under on sacks? He asked 50. What are your over-under? Would you go over 50 or under 50, Andrew?
Oh, gosh. If my memory serves,
how many the Colts had last year, just so for reference.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember. I think Pittsburgh led the NFL in sacks last year with 42 to 45, somewhere in that realm. So if we're going based off of that, so are we basing that off of the number of sacks the Colts had, or are we talking like a league leading?
What was your Colts?
Okay, I was going to say because 50 would definitely be league leading, or if not, somewhere very close to that. But for me, I'm going to go with
the Colts had 41 last year.
Oh, did they? Okay, well maybe my math is way off. I'm not a math person. Sorry, guys.
According to NFL.com, they had 41.
Okay, yeah, no, that's part of the reason why I went into journalism. There's not a lot of math involved. I hate math. I suck at math. I probably look like I can do your math homework, but I promise you I can't.
Me either.
But anyways, with get back to the question, Andrew. No, over under on 50. I'm gonna take the under, but just slightly. They had 41 last year. I think the addition of DeForest Buckner, Kamoka Ture is a healthy scratch. We hope Justin Houston, I think, is a productive guy for you, and Darius Leonard. Let's not forget about him. I think, and maybe even Bobby Okereke has a couple. So, yeah. I'd say somewhere probably between the high 30s, low 40s.
For me, I'm probably going to go between 45 and 50. So I'll probably go somewhere in between there. I mean, you got to think that 3 technique position gave you 3.5 sacks the entire season last year. And I bet you DeForest Buckner has had 3.5 sacks in a single game before. So, I mean, his sack numbers were down even from the year before. And obviously that was because the 49ers added Nick Bosa and they had just other guys getting more sacks. But DeForest Buckner is still going to get to the quarterback. And so I think that automatically, if you go 41 last year, I'm going to give them, 5-6 more easily with DeForest Buckner at that 3 technique position. I think Kamoka Ture is going to, if he stays healthy, he can produce. Ben Banogu, some of these younger guys, I think they have more of an opportunity to get to the quarterback a year later, a little more, developed as pass rushers. So I'm probably going to go under, but very slightly under. Justin says Xavier won't be an All-Pro, but it'll be good. Eddie says our receivers have too much speed. They do. There's a lot of fast receivers on this Colts offense. And he adds we have multiple X factors on this offense. If healthy, yes, we do. And that is the question, if healthy. Justin says, undrafted free agent Travis Reed might have a chance with the roster because of Tell. Probably, I think we already talked about this one. Okay, JGM, he says, not sure if you answered it already or not, but do you guys think the kick/punt returner job is Hines to lose, or does Isaiah Rodgers or Pascal or someone else challenge for that position? I mean, I definitely think that Hines is going to be the punt returner, no question. Now, the kick returner, I'd probably not put Hines as the kick returner. I'd probably say Isaiah Rodgers. He returned a decent amount of kicks last year at UMass. Zach Pascal has handled it before. Even Paris Campbell. Give some of those speedy guys a chance to go out there and be game breakers. And we've always talked about how we want Paris Campbell and Nyheim Hines to get touches. When they do, they are productive. So what better way of getting them touches than having them returning kicks and punts? That's kind of my thoughts on it. What are your thoughts, Andrew?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think giving Hines the starting punt returning role, certainly it's a given. Looking back at that Carolina game, I don't think any person in their right mind, any Colts coach in their right mind, would not give Hines that starting punt return role. I kind of look at that game and I think, what were we doing the 13 weeks before that? Where the heck was Hines when in all those other games? We could have really used that kind of explosiveness. But, no, for me, I mean, I agree just because Isaiah Rodgers has some what's the word I'm looking for? I'm drawing a blank, sorry. He's had some opportunities back when he played in college to do some kick returns. And so I think he's the guy that you maybe give an opportunity to. And then, as you mentioned, with Paris Campbell, the guy that brings that kind of a speed element. I think he returned a couple of kicks last season and certainly showed some flashes. And so, and then as far as Hines is concerned with his kick returning role, here's my concern, Cody. My concern is this: if we expect Hines to have a Darren Sproles, Danny Woodhead-esque role in this Colts offense with Phillip Rivers being that third down, maybe even fourth down pass catching back, I think overloading his plate with both the kick and punt returning roles could potentially damage his success level, or level of success, I should say, in that receiving role on third and fourth down in the season. I don't think that would be wise, in my opinion. And more than that, like I said, you have guys like Isaiah Rodgers, Paris Campbell, that certainly have the capabilities, both with experience and speed-wise, to get the job done too.
Mm-hmm. Justin thinks that Rodgers is going to be the kick returner, Hines is the punt returner. That's certainly an option. I think it's going to be maybe – I think they might split it, Paris Campbell and Isaiah Rodgers. I really do. Interesting. Nomadic Brian says, I had a client tech screen guy cancel because he caught COVID. Ooh, that's unfortunate, man.
Sorry to hear that, man.
JGM, I'm assuming he's talking about, he says, is that from the coach or is that what you think? I mean, that's what we think, but I think that's kind of implied a little bit with Nyheim Hines. And we think just because of the guys that have the speed and have experience at the kick return game, those would be the options that would make the most sense for the Colts this year.
Yeah, I didn't hear that from any of the coaches or anything. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, Nomadic Brian says Brissett's interview was brutal. And Rich, there's some. Let's not hate on Brissett. I mean, he's a decent lead. He's a pretty good leader for this Colts team. Obviously, he leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of his production, but as a person, he's a good guy. Eddie says keep an eye on Grover Stewart. This could be a big breakout year for him. I definitely agree. Grover Stewart. I have vocally said I love Grover Stewart. It's his chance to shine. He came on a little bit later on and took that one tech position, that nose tackle position, away from Margus Hunt when he got benched. And he played pretty well, all things considered. So I like Grover Stewart a lot. Obviously, I think the addition of Buckner will help him get more one-on-one opportunities, more chances to get after the quarterback. He only had 3 sacks last year, so maybe he gets a little bit of an increase in terms of that. Justin agrees. Grover's going to be a monster.
Yeah, I'm right there with you guys, Justin and Eddie and Cody as well. I agree completely. I think Grover is going to have an opportunity to expand off of his production from last season, for sure. Yeah.
And then Rich says the entire reason the Colts picked up Rivers is because Brissett isn't their future. I mean, yeah, I think that move alone made it pretty clear how the Colts feel about Brissett as their starting quarterback long term.
Oh, for sure.
Nicholas asked a question: best Colts Instagram fan page. I mean, we're on Instagram, so you can check us out at BTJ Pod. I know Andrew, you're on Instagram, I believe, as well.
Yes.
So you guys can check them out.
Yeah.
A couple friends, Colts Militia is one of our friends. He's promoted our podcast a couple times. He's a great guy. Colts Talks is another one that I really enjoy that you should check out as well. Both really fantastic individuals. They've helped promote our stuff. So friends of the show for sure. Check them out.
If you're wanting guys to check out my Instagram or Twitter page, you can just go to either one. Type in @Andrew, ANDREW, common spelling, _ then my last name, which is Thomason, THOMISON. And I'm hoping to be back writing for Stampede Blue here soon. I've been in school over the summer. I won't get into that too much for college. And so I've been really, really busy and just haven't had much time. Now that classes are over, I hope to get back to that. So if you're wanting to follow me for those reasons and for also the Bring the Juice podcast reasons as well, go ahead and give me a follow. I would certainly appreciate it.
Yeah. Fun fact, Andrew was actually on the podcast before Derek was. He helped me a lot last year when looking at free agency, the draft, all that stuff. So, Andrew, you're one of the ones, man. You were one of the first ones to help me get this thing off the ground. And, now over a year and a half later, it's been crazy and awesome to see how this thing has blown up. All right. Bernardo asked another question. Eason really the future of the franchise? He's the only quarterback under contract for 2021. That is true. He is the only quarterback at this current time under contract. I mean, you just unfortunately, with the lack of preseason, you just can't see the type of player that he is right now. I mean, he has a chance to learn behind Brissett and Rivers this year, and that's what he's got to do this year. I think that's going to be his best bet right now, is just sitting behind them, knowing he's a third-string quarterback, doing what he did at Washington, obviously taking those critiques from Frank Reich and Nick Sirianni and Marcus Brady, all those guys, and understanding that, I'm not a perfect prospect. I got my flaws. I'm working on those things, learning from Rivers, learning from Brissett. He's in a perfect situation. Now, in terms of future, I mean, I think that's really up in the air. He's a fourth-round pick for a reason. I mean, he could be Marlon Mack or he could be Zach Banner. We just don't know. And I don't think he's going to be Zach Banner. Zach Banner was just, really bad. He didn't even make it out of training camp. He was that bad for the Colts that year. So, yeah, I mean, fourth-round picks are kind of fly or flop a little bit. It could go either way for me. So, I definitely think it would be wise if the Colts decide to not bring back Rivers next year or Brissett. I think they got to look at getting a quarterback really early in the draft next year. All right. Yeah, I agree, Lavoine. I agree with that. Tennessee Titans Weekly, our friends, they're in the chat. Welcome, guys. They say, hello, gentlemen. Good seeing you guys. You think this is T.Y. Hilton's last year with the Colts. Now, T.Y. Hilton's talked about this a little bit, and I made a video on it a couple days ago regarding Hilton's comments, basically saying, look, I miss a lot of games the last couple of years. I want to be a Colt. I want to continue to play, but it really depends how the season goes. What are your thoughts, Andrew? Do you think this is T.Y. Hilton's last year, or do you think he has another contract in him?
No, I think Chris Ballard and Jim Irsay would be foolish to let a guy like T.Y. Hilton walk out the door. I certainly don't think this is his last year, especially if he can come in and prove that he's completely healthy and play really well and be productive like we know that he's capable of doing. And I hate to be so abrupt, but I actually just got a call from my sister, and I got a family emergency I have to handle. So I actually have to jet. Sorry, guys. Sorry, Cody. I don't mean to. I text you.
No, take care of it.
Announce it and whatnot. But I got a jet.
Yeah, I'll continue with these questions. I'll probably wrap it up here because we got that fantasy draft at 10, right? So
yes,
I'll probably wrap it up here within the next 5-10 minutes. So, okay. Well, man, I hope everything's well, and I hope everything is handled. So, yep, take care, man.
Appreciate it, guys. Take care.
All right, let's keep going, guys. So I agree. I don't think this is T.Y. Hilton's last year with the Colts. I think he has another contract in him. I think Frank Reich, they love T.Y. Hilton. So I do think he has another contract in him, and I really hope he can stay healthy this year. I hope he has a bounce-back year because he is effective when he is fully healthy. That'll be the question mark for me. Justin says if Eason can read NFL defenses and work on his throw on the run, he'll definitely be the quarterback of the future. I agree. I think he has some things to work on. Frank Reich mentioned his footwork. He's got some other things to work on as well. And what a perfect opportunity to sit back and do that this year. Kelvin says, what's up, guys? Thanks, Kelvin. Justin says, I'd cut LaRaven Clark for Carter O'Donnell. Now, I don't know if I'd necessarily do that. I mean, I know LaRaven Clark, he's got a lot of crap from people, including myself. But for me, LaRaven Clark, he's got something over some of these guys, and that's experience. And I think that's something that has to be considered. Now, maybe they keep both of these guys, and maybe they only keep a couple interior guys. I don't know. I think they're going to probably keep 9 offensive linemen, so you think you're 5. You think, obviously, Danny Pinter is going to be 6. I would say LaRaven Clark's going to be 7. And then those last 2 spots are really up in the air. I mean, you got Tavon Patterson, you got Jake Eldrenkamp, Carter O'Donnell may be another name that the Colts would consider. So that'll be interesting to see. The tackle depth certainly isn't ideal, but I could potentially see Carter O'Donnell making this roster, and I could see them both making this roster together. All right, Justin asks a question, or he's talking on this. He says, at this point, as bad as the Raven has been, anybody, even Zach Banner, would be better. I don't know if Zach Banner would have been better, but I do agree. You need to upgrade at that backup left tackle position this next offseason. I've been saying this for a while. I feel like you need to, especially with Costanzo, obviously being on the last year, the last probably contract he'll be with the Colts until he retires, unless he just wants to play longer. We'll see what happens. Bernardo asked a question. Do you see Pinter taking Glowinski's spot someday in the future? Ballard seems to love him. I mean, in the future, I could definitely see that happening. Glowinski's got, 2 years left on his contract or something along those lines? So I could definitely see as Danny Pinter continues to develop, continues to get used to the guard position. I could see that. I really could. I could see that in a couple of years. But for this year, I think Glowinski's the starter. I think Pinter's got to learn the guard position. If you remember at Ball State, he started out as a tight end, moved to offensive tackle, played snaps there, and now the Colts want to move him inside. So I think he just needs time there. No preseason definitely doesn't help him. It really hurts a lot of these rookies this year. Yeah, I agree, Justin. If Pinter developed into something great, he definitely could. I think he could. He's just a raw prospect at this point. He was really good at Ball State. I mean, he really was. He was a good tackle. I think he has a chance. If he bulks up a little bit, gets a little bit stronger, he could be a good guard for the Colts in the future. I'm actually caught up with the questions, crazy enough. So be sure to send a few more. I'm probably going to wrap this up in a couple minutes here because I still got that fantasy draft. Crazy time. It's 10 o'clock. Wow. Almost 10 o'clock. And also, if you're still in this chat, still listening, if you haven't subscribed yet, we'd love if you did. And also leave us a like, leave us a comment, whatever. Justin, thanks for bringing in another question, man. He asked about Robert Windsor. He says, does Windsor make this roster? Now, Derek would say yes. I don't know if I would at this point because there is so much depth. I mean, I feel like if you cut Tyquan Lewis, then yes. But now you got Taylor Stallworth as well to compete with. So I don't know. It's going to be hard for me to say yes. But Derek has mentioned this, okay, a lot. Derek says he plays with so much energy. He kind of has that Sheldon Day type of thing. He's not the most physically gifted guy in the world, but he just plays with so much juice, right? He does. He brings energy every single time he's on the field. He wants to go out there and he wants to dominate. And you got to love that mentality. So maybe he does have a chance. I think he has a chance more than I'm giving him credit for. Derek probably is spot on there. Bernardo's talking about Mathis. He says Mathis will get into the Ring of Honor. Any more to come soon? That's an interesting question. I've thought about that. Maybe Bob Sanders, I know, is it's a name that people have talked about. I know Tarek Glenn potentially is a name that people have talked about as well. Let's see. Who else hasn't been in yet? Dallas Clark. I want Dallas Clark to get in. I think he was the only Colts tight end to get over 100 catches, so he definitely should be in. He's franchise leader for tight end, so I really think so. Justin says we should trade Lewis to the Jets and keep Windsor. Yeah, the Jets would probably take him. They've taken half of our old defense as well, so why not? Maybe they can give us one of their players. They could trade like Sam Darnold to us. I'd be fine with that. I mean, not a big deal. Miles says, "Did you see the rookie singing?" I did see that. That was a funny video. It's great that the Colts can post stuff like that and kind of have a little bit of lightheartedness. Shout out to Julian Blackman, though. I mean, out of any of those guys, Julian Blackman has some pipes, man. He can sing. That'll be interesting to see. Julian Blackman and who is the other guy that's a really good singer for the Colts? I'm trying to remember. His name's escaping me. I want to see a duet with those two guys. See how good they do. And Miles says it's very funny. I agree. It was a good video, good lighthearted video for me to see, and I watched it last night. All right. Well, I'm caught up on questions here. So I'll give it to 950. I'll give it to 950. And then after that, I will cut it off here. A little bit shorter tonight, but without Derek always wants to go for like 2 or 3 hours, and I'm like, man, that's a long time. So I'm just going to probably cut it to about 1:40. So definitely be sure to add a few more questions as well. By the way, I guess this is a time for me to plug our latest video. Guys, if you haven't checked it out, be sure to do that because – man, I spent a ton of time editing that stuff, editing that video, adding a lot of cool elements. I felt like, I was up till 1:30, 2 o'clock last night doing that because I wanted to do that. So be sure to check it out if you haven't yet. I really like that video. We're talking about 5 burning questions. I guess we said 6 burning questions for the Indianapolis Colts in 2020. Yeah, speaking of Carter O'Donnell, he's from Canada. He was singing the Canadian national anthem. That was pretty funny. And Miles says, Julian's freaking awesome at singing. He is. He is. It was funny because the Colts said, they posted a tweet and said, these rookies aren't here because of their singing abilities. And Julian Blackman's like, wait, hold up. Like, I'm a good singer. I know I'm a good singer. It was pretty funny. Nomadic Brian says, great job tonight. Go Colts. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it, man. Miles says, you think the Colts have a top 5 defense this year? I got asked this question in our last live stream. I don't think I'd say 5. I'd probably say 10 is very realistic. But it's going to hinge for me on that secondary. And, are they good? Is Xavier Rhodes back to 60, 70% of his form? Or is he back to last year? And how does Malik Hooker play off? Does he continue to blow coverages, continue to be hurt? There's a lot of factors in that secondary. It could go from one side of the spectrum to the other side for me. It could be really good or really bad. That's kind of my thoughts on it. Justin asked about Farrod Green. We talked about Farrod Green a little bit when we did our tight end breakdown a couple months ago. Don't think he probably realistically has a chance to make this roster because you got Roosevelt Nix as well. I think the Colts could kind of use him potentially how they used Ryan Hewitt, if you remember that name in 2018. He was strictly a run-blocking tight end. Now, I know Nix is more of strictly a fullback, but I could see the Colts opting to only keep 3 quote-unquote tight ends and keeping Roosevelt Nix and having him in certain packages, kind of blocking on the edge. So, yeah, that's my thought on that. Miles says, got to respect the grind, man. Appreciate it, man. Appreciate it. Have you ever met a Colts player in real life, Cody? He says, I should say in person. I have. I've had a couple cool opportunities to do that. I guess I'll say most recently, last year, I went down to Colts training camp for a day. That was awesome. I got to interview Quincy Wilson, which sad he didn't pan out, but still a cool experience. I got to – Bobby Okereke was meeting with some of the media. I got to ask him a question about Anthony Walker and how much he learned from Walker, and he said, Walker's just been such a big help. It seems like Anthony Walker's just helped everybody in that linebacker room. And then also talked to Eric Ebron a little bit. For whatever reason, it was crazy. That day, Jim Irsay met with the media, so I was able to be a part of that too. So I've been able to do that a couple times. It was pretty cool. It was my freshman year of college. Some of my friends and I, one of my friends lived down in like the Castleton area. And we went down there for the weekend. We went to the mall down there, and they had like this NFL experience. And basically all you had to do was test drive these new cars that they had, and you could meet T.Y. Hilton and Vontae Davis. And that was an incredible opportunity for me. First off, I got those signed pictures, 2 signed pictures from each of them. T.Y. Hilton, the one where he caught the long pass in that Kansas City game to win the game ultimately. I got that signed. And then also the Vontae Davis big hit on Giovanni Bernard, if you remember that from a couple of years ago. So those are 2 really cool opportunities. And I got to get pictures with them as well. I'm trying to think. I've been to training camp a few times and met a few different players down the road, but those are some of the most notable ones. Bernardo says, Mo will have an amazing year. You'll see. I would love for Mo Alley-Cox to have an amazing year. He has so many physical tools. I want him to put them together. I really do. Okay. Still confused by Logan Ryan isn't signed. I think he'd help a lot just playing those multiple roles. I think the thing is the Colts already have slot corners, and that's what Logan Ryan, has played with the Titans. If he was more of a boundary outside corner, I would definitely agree. But I think the Colts are lacking in that department. That's why they're not really bringing him in. And also, if he's brought in, he's going to want to be a starter. I mean, you got Xavier Rhodes, Rocky Sin, Kenny Moore. He's not going to want to be the number 4. That's my thoughts on Logan Ryan. Yeah, Mo is definitely an outstanding blocker. I mean, he's ginormous, and he can use those giant mitts and that giant body frame to just really be an effective blocker. He really is. All right, I think that wrapped up this podcast, guys. Thanks so much for listening. Like I said, be sure to check out our most recent videos. We're going to have another video coming out tomorrow, continuing our series, basically looking at the Colts versus the rest of the NFL. How do their position groups stack up? We're looking at the tight ends. Speaking of Mo Alley-Cox, we're looking at the tight ends. So thanks, guys, so much. I hope you guys have a great rest of your night, and go Colts.